At first glance, this place looked electric. Bright lights spilled onto the street, elegant crowds moved through its doors, and music poured into the night. It felt alive, like the center of something important. Nothing about it suggested injustice. But this club was not built for the people who created its music. It was built for the people who consumed it. Every performance, every rule, every seat in the room existed for a single purpose: control. Not through force, but through spectacle. Not through punishment, but through presentation. For years, the Cotton Club was presented as the crown jewel of Harlem nightlife. It was described as sophisticated, modern, and glamorous, a place where America's most exciting new sound seemed to live. Jazz was refined and elevated, framed as proof of cultural progress. But behind the music, behind the glamour, and behind the applause was a system built on exclusion, exploitation, and a carefully managed illusion. This is the story of the Cotton Club and the darker reality behind one of the most famous venues in American music history. In the early decades of the 20th century, Harlem was undergoing a transformation unlike anything the neighborhood had seen before. The Great Migration brought hundreds of thousands of Black Americans from the rural South to northern cities, carrying with them traditions, skills, and cultural forms that would reshape American life. Harlem became a center of Black intellectual thought, artistic experimentation, and musical innovation. Writers debated identity and politics, painters reimagined American modernism, and musicians blended blues, ragtime, and spirituals into something new. Jazz was not born in concert halls or elite clubs. It emerged in informal spaces such as rent parties held to pay the landlord, crowded basements, neighborhood bars, and dance halls where musicians played for people who lived the music they created. Early jazz figures like Louis Armstrong built their reputations in these environments, where improvisation mattered more than polish and emotional truth mattered more than image. Jazz was not just entertainment, it was expression. As Harlem flourished, white America took notice. Jazz felt thrilling and modern, but it also felt dangerous to those who feared social change. The music challenged traditional ideas about rhythm, structure, and respectability. It was exciting precisely because it came from a world many white Americans did not understand and did not wish to fully engage with. What white audiences wanted was access without intimacy. They wanted the sound without the social reality that produced it. They wanted excitement without equality. That tension created the conditions that made the Cotton Club possible. The Cotton Club opened in 1923 and quickly positioned itself as one of the most exclusive nightlife destinations in New York City. It offered fine dining, elaborate stage productions, and orchestras led by some of the most talented musicians in the country. Downtown audiences traveled uptown to experience what was marketed as something thrilling and exotic, a controlled encounter with Harlem's energy. A single rule defined everything inside the room. Black performers were welcome on stage, but Black patrons were not welcome in the audience. This policy was openly enforced. The exclusion affected even prominent Black artists, intellectuals, and musicians living just blocks away who were barred from entry. Duke Ellington could lead the house orchestra, but he could not sit in the audience as a guest. The Cotton Club existed physically in Harlem while socially excluding Harlem's residents. This arrangement was not a contradiction in the eyes of its owners. It was the foundation of the business. The club sold an experience carefully designed for white consumption, and racial exclusion was essential to maintaining that illusion. Ownership and management of the Cotton Club reflected broader power structures of the era. The club was controlled by white businessmen with ties to organized crime, and its success depended on maintaining strict control over its image and operations. Performers understood that behind the glamour was an environment shaped by intimidation and surveillance. While audiences saw refinement and elegance, musicians and dancers navigated a system where dissent carried consequences. The Cotton Club's aesthetic reinforced stereotypes that had long shaped how Black culture was presented to white audiences. Stage designs leaned heavily on plantation imagery and jungle themes, presenting Harlem as a fantasy rather than a living community. Performers were expected to embody exaggerated versions of Black identity that aligned with white expectations. Even stars like Cab Calloway, whose charisma and musical brilliance were undeniable, were encouraged to perform within caricatures that made audiences comfortable. Jazz was celebrated, but only when it fit the image being sold. Despite these constraints, the musicians who played the Cotton Club were extraordinary. Duke Ellington transformed the club's orchestra into a laboratory for sophisticated composition, quietly expanding jazz harmony and orchestration while working within imposed limits. Cab Calloway turned performance into spectacle, using humor and energy to captivate audiences while navigating the expectations placed upon him. Vocalists such as Ethel Waters and Lena Horne appeared in Cotton Club productions early in their careers, gaining exposure that would later define their success. Radio broadcasts carried these performances across the country, making the Cotton Club one of the most influential platforms in American music. For millions of listeners, this was their first exposure to jazz. The club shaped how the nation understood the sound. But exposure came at a cost. Musical arrangements were tightly controlled, improvisation was limited, lyrics were monitored, performers were required to follow strict dress codes and behavioral rules both on and off stage. Dancers faced particularly harsh standards. Selection was often based on skin tone, height, and body type, with lighter skin preferred for visibility under stage lights. These preferences reflected deeply ingrained colorism and reinforced hierarchies even within the Black community. The Cotton Club did more than present jazz. It reshaped it. To appeal to mainstream audiences, performances were polished and standardized. The raw edges that defined early jazz were softened. What audiences heard was not the full complexity of Harlem's musical culture, but a version filtered through commercial demands. For performers, this created a constant tension between opportunity and compromise. Some accepted the limitations as the price of visibility. Others resented the loss of creative freedom and dignity. Many understood that refusing to participate meant disappearing from an industry controlled by white promoters, record labels, and radio networks. The Cotton Club did not need to threaten musicians. The structure of the industry did that for them. Outside the club's doors, Harlem struggled with realities that contrasted sharply with the luxury inside. Overcrowded housing, limited employment opportunities, and systemic discrimination shaped daily life. While white patrons arrived by taxi, spent money, applauded Black performers, and returned downtown, the surrounding community saw little economic benefit from the club's success. Harlem became a stage set rather than a partner. Its culture was consumed, but its people were excluded. The Cotton Club's prominence reinforced a broader cultural lesson. Black creativity could be celebrated without granting Black Americans equal access or power. This separation of culture from community allowed exploitation to flourish while maintaining the appearance of progress. As the 1930s approached, the social and economic landscape began to shift. The Great Depression reshaped nightlife, reducing audiences and changing public attitudes. At the same time, Black artists and intellectuals became more vocal about exploitation and inequality. Musicians who had passed through the Cotton Club began seeking greater autonomy elsewhere, forming bands and venues that allowed more creative control. In 1935, after racial tensions and riots shook Harlem, the Cotton Club relocated downtown. The move was symbolic. The club left the neighborhood that had given it legitimacy, taking its profits and prestige with it, while Harlem was left to confront the consequences of exploitation without reward. The original Cotton Club eventually closed, but its reputation endured. Over time, popular memory softened its darker realities. Films, books, and documentaries celebrated its music and glamour while minimizing its exclusions and control. The Cotton Club became shorthand for a golden age of jazz, even as the conditions that shaped that era were often left unexplored. Today, the Cotton Club is remembered as a cultural landmark. It helped launch careers, preserve music, and shape American sound. The legacies of Duke Ellington, Cab Calloway, and countless others are inseparable from it. But it also enforced segregation, profited from racial stereotypes, and restricted artistic freedom. These truths exist simultaneously, even when history prefers a simpler narrative. The Cotton Club was not an anomaly. It was a product of its time. It was a place where innovation and injustice coexisted, where brilliance was celebrated under conditions that maintained inequality. It reminds us that visibility does not guarantee fairness, and success does not always mean freedom. Jazz outlived the Cotton Club. The music evolved, escaped control, and spread far beyond the walls that once contained it. But many of the musicians who passed through that stage never fully escaped the system that shaped their careers. Their talent helped define American culture long before they were granted full recognition or equality. The Cotton Club is gone now, but the questions it raises remain. Who controls culture? Who profits from it? Who is welcomed inside? And who is kept outside? At first glance, it looked like celebration, music, applause, light. But beneath the sound was something darker. This was not just a club, it was a mirror, and what it reflected still matters.